Coach Hill, thank you for joining me. Where does today's recording find you?
It finds my feet on the ground, which is a rarity because I spend about 200 plus days on a plane, and I'm actually at home in Boise, Idaho. So I'm a 10 out of 10 today. You got me in a really good place.
Would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself? And I suppose I will say, for the sake of the conversation, I have read your book. I know we'll talk a little bit about that. It will relate to your work, of course. So I know a little about you, but that people are complex. So do you mind telling me about yourself?
I'm an entrepreneur by trade. I'm a master gardener as a hobby. I'm a dog mom and I'm a family oriented human being. I love my family. I spend the majority of my time with them. But I'm probably most well known for my work with the NFL and the NBA.
You have this book, Train Your Money, which I read. I enjoyed it. And I really do mean that. I liked your book. I think it's the perfect length for what you're communicating, and it gave me a feeling for your voice and how I imagine you present when you're speaking or working with clients. So I know a bit about your work, but can you describe, I guess, what your business is, who you work with, and all that?
Yeah, I started a company called Financial Footwork in 2017, and the company was designed all around helping people handle money. And the people I was helping were NFL players. And that was by complete and utter accident. If you would have asked me in college if I would be working with pro sports teams, the answer would have probably been, huh? Just kind of what? What are you talking about? And my journey through life up until I was about 28 when I founded my company really was trials and tribulations with family illnesses and money battles and all of that combined. And while that was happening, I was in the finance industry. And so I was learning all about money from a lot of different angles. And I used that to help some of my friends who were making a pretty nice sum of money on an annual basis do something with it rather than just spend it, blow it, and have to restart when they were done in the league. And that led me to creating my alter ego, Coach Hill, who is my speaking voice, I guess you could say, when I'm on stage. So I do a lot of presentations, I do a lot of seminars and keynotes, and my job is to convey personal finance in an easy to understand way. So my book I'm really glad that you got that from my book because it should convey finance is not something to be scared of. It's something you can ease into and it's something you can learn no matter where you are in life. And that has always been my mission. And that's our mission at Financial Footwork is to make personal finance approachable, something that you can do on a regular basis and build positive habits that lead to financial success. So that's why I wrote the book was to complement all the work that we're doing in the pro athlete, university, and corporate space to really help people understand that you don't have to have a master's in finance to take control of where your money's at, where you want it to go, and the lifestyle you want to live.
How was it that you came upon or fell into working with professional athletes? Because you said something to the effect of that was not planned, but did it start with one person or did it open up with a team working with you?
It started with a guy by the name of Caleb Thornhill. I will praise this man's name for the rest of my life. He's become a very dear friend and someone I work with very closely. I had a former NFL player who played in the league for quite a long time. One of his passions was helping people in the league, the younger guys below him, really pull them up by the bootstraps and make sure that they weren't failing. And one of the things that he noticed was that finance was a problem with NFL players. And it wasn't that they wanted to spend all their money. It was lack of education or lack of literacy. And his name is Spencer Paysinger. He played at University of Oregon. I went to Oregon State, and we had a lot of mutual friends. And I was helping some friends from Oregon State that were in the league. So this kind of goes full circle. But they were making comments about how I should be helping more teams or more guys. And then Spencer said, "Hey, I want you to meet Caleb." And Caleb just so happened to be the director of player engagement for the Miami Dolphins, which is the one job in each team or at each team that helps the players on and off the field. So his job is to facilitate programming, make sure that the families are taken care of, the players transition from team to team properly, the rookies come in and they get what they need. And I learned all of this through just osmosis. But he asked me to fly to Florida and he said, "Hey, we never Zoomed. I didn't even know what he looked like. He called me up. He said, "I want to do this." We had a bunch of back and forth phone calls because this was prior to Zoom being a really big thing. And he said, "Can you fly to Florida? We're going to do a test pilot. I want to see what you can do." And I said, "Great, let's do it." So he had two former players. We did a week-long program and passed those guys through this program. They got a certificate when they were done through the University of Miami. And I was part of that integral process. And as we were doing that, I didn't know where it was going to lead. I didn't know that it was going to lead to the Dolphins. I had no idea. And he called me up that following Monday and said, "Hey, how do you feel about working with the Miami Dolphins?" And I was like, "Sure. What do you want me to do?" He's like, "I want you to work with the team, the players directly." And I said, "Awesome. Let's do it." And we spent a year building curriculum together, trial, error, all of the things, and put together a really comprehensive rookie program that then the Browns and the Packers picked up within 6 months. And then it was a domino effect after that. I got to meet everybody. I know most of the directors now, and they're all wonderful people to work with. It's pretty easy. We talk through what are the guys in your locker room experiencing, feeling, talking about, and then we bring the education to back what they're interested in. And so I do that now for 12 NFL teams.
As you talk about it, it sounds to me like, given a little bit that I know about, how you have people that come from a situation of not necessarily having a lot of money, and now all of a sudden they have sort of feast or famine situations, or NFL players are paid when they play and then they're injured and they're not paid very often, depending on contracts. So I hope that it it feels as consequential or as important in reality as it certainly sounds.
Oh, definitely. These guys become my little brothers. They become my friends. Their family becomes my family. I work in a people business. And when you are helping someone overcome fear with money or abundance with money, and maybe there's a little too much excess, you are helping them understand how they think about money. There is there is a very intense trust bond that is built in doing that. And money really is about trust and trusting the right people and hopefully not making too many mistakes on the way so that you're not damaging your financial picture. And for pro athletes, what's different than from someone like me and you, an entrepreneur or someone working at 9 to 5, they come into money early in life and their mistakes are much larger, which means they can lose more and they have more at stake at that younger age. And if it's not handled properly and they build trust with the wrong people, they either lose it all, get taken advantage of, or they have to rebuild at some point. And as a coach, the nice thing is I'm never in their money. I'm just there as a second set of eyes to help them make strategic, smart decisions, help them check the people around them. And there aren't very many people like me that do what I do, which is, I guess, good and bad. Good because it keeps me very busy. Bad because there's still more help to be needed. And it's not just at the pro level. I think one of the reasons that so many people gravitate towards pro athletic money is because everybody wants to understand money in some capacity and everybody wants to grow their pot. So of course, when you look at an athlete who's making millions, you want to be that athlete. Why wouldn't you? What are they doing? How are they doing it? Why do they fail? I hear these questions all the time. When someone figures out what I do, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're there because so many of them fail." It's actually a common misconception. Now, with the way things are moving, far less failures occur than people think. There are still guys that make really public bad decisions. Yes, that's always going to happen. It's just we all make bad decisions. Unfortunately, theirs are a little more public than ours. But the majority of these guys are making really strategic decisions, and they're using their money in a way that will propel their families and their children to build generational wealth. So it's a very fun process to be a part of, and I'm also very blessed. The guys I work with are phenomenal. I could not ask for a better clientele. The NBA and the NFL are slightly different, but I really love the dynamics of both groups.
Are there common things you're training them on or teaching them? Are there different things depending on where people are at in their career or their life?
Yes, yes, and yes. So, um, yes, each group of NFL players is categorized based on how long they've been in the league. And that's actually something that's done at the team level. We've got our incoming rookies, we've got our second and third year players, and then we've got our veterans. So there's 3 categories at any NFL team. And depending on who I am working with, what we are talking about changes. There are core fundamentals that we take every rookie through. And I talk about a lot of these in my book. Cash flow management is the main one. You can't determine your lifestyle. You can't build wealth. You can't invest. You can't buy real estate if you can't master cash flow. So really understanding how cash flow works is a crucial moment for us when they are rookies. And it's not just about money in, money out. It's how do taxes work? Who do you have to pay? How much do they cost? Financial advisors, CPAs, agents, NFLPA dues. There's a lot that goes into understanding where the money is going and how much is actually left. And then when you have your pot, what's left, how do you strategically divvy that up? What is your money map? Where is that money going to go and how is it going to work? And so we spend a lot of time developing that financial foundation because if your financial house doesn't have a good foundation, it's going to crumble when you get to the higher levels. So we make sure that that's a very strong component. And with cash flow comes credit. So we spend a lot of time with our rookies teaching them fundamentals of cash flow and credit and getting them into a really good place. Once that's done, and we've talked about taxes and we've talked about financial teams, by the time they're in their second and third year, we get to do the fun stuff. We get to simulate stock markets and we get to buy real estate and we get to talk about starting a business and registering an LLC versus an S Corp. And we start really getting into how you develop wealth in different ways. We talk about the periodic table of assets and how different asset classes do different things. So we spend a lot of time developing the foundation as rookies, building on that foundation second and third year, giving them a taste of different things that they can do. And then when they get to the veteran status, they can explore certain avenues and they can come and ask me questions. I can put them in touch with people. The team has resources that they can use. So we're building a program that really does compound on itself. It's not just a one-off. We don't just go in and say, okay, this is how you build a budget and hope it sticks. We go in and say, here's the numbers. Let's get into the weeds. And we really do that with them. An average rookie class is 10 to 20 guys maximum. So it is a much smaller group and they're all very well acquainted with each other by the time we're getting into these things, into these topics. So it's a comfortable place to have hard money conversations. If it was a room of 100 people, we couldn't. So being able to break them into their respective groups and give them a lot more of a focused group effort versus 200 people in a room, 300 people in a room, it does make a big difference. So we do have curriculum. We do it by grouping. And then that curriculum does shift by team based on what we know about each locker room, because every locker room is immensely different. I can look at each locker room by the time we're halfway through a season and tell you which ones still need fundamentals and which ones are absolutely ready to jump to the next thing and be able to pivot in different avenues for those guys, because we don't want to keep reiterating things that they don't need to hear. But if they need to keep hearing something, we want to make sure we hit that so it's not missed. It's truly financial coaching and education all wrapped into one.
You said something along the lines of things have changed. I forget exactly what the statement was at the time, but it sounded to me like maybe there are some changes in the athlete's preparation or mental state or their education about money or something of that nature before they come in, or maybe you're finding that people are succeeding in one way or another more. I'm curious, I guess, if I back up, what has changed over time as you've been doing this work?
When I first started doing this, NIL didn't exist. So NIL is name, image, and likeness in college sports. And that means that athletes who are playing in college can now get paid through multiple different revenue streams on their college athletic career. It can be brand deals. It can be social media posts. They can get paid to post on TikTok if they've got a big enough following. They can receive rev share from the university that they play for, which is a big one. Rev share is very, very big, especially when you've got top 30 universities whose rev share bucket is 22 million spread across their teams. 75% of it goes to football. The other 15% goes to the other revenue generating sports. If you're not in a revenue generating sport, most of the time you're not going to get paid. But if you are the star of a non-revenue generating sport and you've got a bunch of brand deals, you're still making a ton of money. So NIL has really changed the pro sports community, the world we live in. And it is a small bubble. Mind you, there's only 2,200 NFL players at any given time in the league. So it's a very small brotherhood of men. And they are in a league of their own, is maybe a good way to put that. So when they do come into the league, and they are all coming in with different educational prowess, background, and knowledge, some of them are coming in making more money in NIL than they did on their NFL contract, or that they will on their NFL contract, but they're paid differently. So we're now actually having to educate these young men on how NIL differs from being an employee of an NFL team, how the pay structure is going to be different, and then what you can and cannot do with that pay from a tax perspective. So we are now combating bad habits coming into the NFL that maybe would not have been there prior to 2021. And when I say bad habits, just everything that comes in goes out. And as a 18-year-old, I would have done the same thing. If I didn't have anything and I wanted all the things I could possibly have and I don't need to worry about money, absolutely I'm going to spend it. But that creates bad habits very, very young. And then they come into the league and those bad habits translate into something else. And so I, as an educator and some of the other educators I work with, we've seen a migration from almost no knowledge and no practice with money in 2017 to 2021 to now coming in with money, understanding money a little bit, having it focus as if you're a business owner, and then having to pivot and understand how a business is run when you're an employee and how the money is going to show up. So it's not that things are bad and or good. It's just the market has completely shifted because NIL has completely changed the game. And that's what we're facing now in the personal finance space at the pro level, which is also why I now work with multiple college teams and specifically football. And then some universities, I work with all of the college students within that university footprint because they are earning. I mean, we have student athletes earning more than their parents in a revenue share salary on an annual basis right now. So the parents don't even know what to do because one, they've never run a business. They have no idea how self-employment tax works. They don't know how to structure an LLC. They don't know how to do any of this. It's a completely new world. And if you don't do it right, year one, you might not walk away with any money. So it's a very unique world that we live in and one that we're trying to get ahead of. But every time we get a step ahead, some of the rules change and we take a step back. So it's been a little bit of an uphill battle. But I will say guys are coming in with a bit more knowledge, maybe just some bad habits too.
It's interesting. If you had asked me before this conversation, I guess, Eric, do you imagine that the average NFL, NBA, whatever it is player coming in, rookie player, that their intelligence about money or money management or finances would be higher, lower, the same as maybe 10 years ago? I think I would have said, I imagine that it's at least slightly higher. And I think I would have said that because some of these athletes are getting reps in earlier in their life. But now as you're talking, I'm thinking, it is, I wonder, and maybe you can help me understand this. I wonder if there's sort of a rich get richer, poor get poorer sort of thing, but in terms of rich or poor support, like, do you find, Coach Hill, that all things being equal, that someone that has strong family support or has someone in their life that is willing to talk to them about money or really has their best interests in mind or something of that nature, do you find that those players coming from NIL into NFL, NBA, whatever, that they're leaps and bounds ahead of the other players who maybe got their reps in, but it was more bad reps, maybe?
I would say yes. I think that your financial system as a young adult, especially in college, can make or break you financially. And I don't say that lightly because I think support is almost always given with good intention. Now, there are people that give support with bad intention, and we know this. But I think parents supporting children, there's a genuinely good intention behind that. But without the knowledge to understand how to support your child and let them become the adult they need to be and let them learn a little bit at a time, if we don't have the right support, we end up seeing a lot of these young athletes, females and males. I see a lot of the female athletes that come into money because they are making buku bucks off of their brands, off of the way that they present themselves to the public, off of the brand endorsements that they get, off of the social media following that they have. These women are outperforming the men in some cases, which is lovely to see. And it's part of sports, right? And we can use a couple case studies. When Sports Illustrated came out with the top 10 NIL earning athletes, the top two were Angel Reese and Livy Dunn, and they both played for LSU. I had the pleasure of working with both of them. I don't know them well, but they were, honest to God, lovely to work with when I was in the building with them. And both of them were at the top of the Sports Illustrated NIL earnings list, and there was no rev share at that time. It was just off of their earnings. And if you looked at their support systems and who was around them, those people were consistently lifting them up and trying to help them make good decisions. So does the support system make or break you? Definitely. We just don't see the money lost on the young men and women that are earning NIL that maybe get out of college. We don't hear about their stories yet because this is the first year we're graduating them. So 2026 is the first year we're graduating a full 4 years of NIL, which is to say that is one wild, because I remember where I was sitting when NIL went live. I was actually in St. Louis, Missouri, going to the airport, ironically enough, in a rental car, and I got the notification on my phone, and it just kept ringing and ringing, and I went, oh, this is going to be crazy. And that was in 2021. And we are now fast forward in the 2026 school year. We're graduating out that first wave of NIL babies, like full 4 years first wave. There have been graduates already. But this is, we don't have any stats. We don't know what that support system has actually done. So do I think that the guys are leaps and bounds ahead with good support? Yes, because I can see it in the guys that come into my NFL locker room. But you have to consider that as a very small number in comparison to the total number of student athletes earning NIL, because we draft in 500 rookies a year. Not even draft, we draft in 200 and some, and then free agent the rest of them. It is such a small pool of the total NIL pool that we don't have stats on any of it. I will pause and say the football side of it is an interesting world to be in, because I really do see the parents wanting to support, and it's not that they don't want to. It's lack of resources leading up to this point. So now we've got younger men getting money faster without the habits and responsibility and onus to be able to say, can we pause? Because they don't know how. They don't know who to talk to. So we're setting them up for a little bit of failure without giving them the education. And that's where universities are stepping up, and they're saying, we have to give, if we're going to pay this much money, we have a responsibility to give them some education. I will shout out LSU from the rooftops for years and years. They brought me in 2021, knowing that this was going to be a thing. And we developed an entire program for their whole student athlete body, because they want these young kids to be able to take ownership of their money and then do something with it. And it was such a pleasure to watch them say, like, we actually care about the student, not the athlete. Like, we're here for the student, the person. The athlete comes second, but because athletics is paying them, we want to make sure they have the tools. And I think support doesn't just come from parents. I think support or family. I think it comes from institutions like colleges that are paying this to you, or you see it in corporate benefits spaces all the time. Employers provide resources to their employees constantly because they want that success. So support, I think, is a fundamental baseline that a lot of us are missing in our financial life.
It seemed to me as I was reading your book that one of the things that is important, not just with money, but with lots of things in life, is that when you encounter a setback, to have not just the mindset or the opportunity to learn from that challenge or setback, but also to have I guess I should separate, to have the mindset, the support to learn from something rather than to just move on and potentially repeat mistakes, but then also to have the opportunity to recover. And so an example with an athlete might be easier for people to imagine than, maybe you or I as 20 or 22-year-olds. An athlete that is making whatever, they're making $1 million a year. They have some sort of setback, or they make a mistake with their money and they lose $1 million. Well, if they're lucky enough to make $1 million next year, then they need to be able mentally, to learn from that. They need to have the support to learn from that, if it's a coach or whatever it is. But they also have to have that next round of money coming in. Whereas if that rookie comes in and they're getting $1 million or whatever it is, and they make a mistake, and the next year they're not making $1 million, then yes, you can become a better person and, you can learn how to manage the $50,000 you make in year 2 when you're out of the league. But it certainly seems harder to learn those lessons and also recover at the same time. And that was, I think, a little bit of what was underneath my imagined response to, is their money management ability better or worse? I was thinking, oh, they get more reps in. But to your story, to your book, and I think some of what you're saying, it seems to me like you have to have that psychology, you have to have that mental state, but also the chance to learn, the chance to recover from it.
Yes. Math or money. And let's talk about money and math for a second, because you said mindset. And one of the things I always say is money is 99% mindset and 1% math. And it's not because money isn't math, because it is. Everything that we do with money is an exchange of currency, which is adding, subtracting, dividing, compounding, you name it. However, you can't get to the math if you don't have the mindset right, because the numbers will not follow. If your mindset is, I can spend it all and I can do whatever I want, it doesn't matter, chances are money ain't going to be there. But if you look at it as a plan, a blueprint, you're playing chess, not checkers. What moves do you have to make mindset wise? What things do you have to give up as an opportunity cost? What types of things do you have to pull back on? What things can you be really loose and abundant on? And be able to make those decisions. And we're asking 18 to 22-year-old children who have never had to make hard decisions in their life to make decisions about something that their environment has curated, their emotions do not know how to control, and they don't have the education to back up. I call them the 3 E's of money. One of my keynotes is the 3 E's of money: environment, emotions, and education. They learn about money before they learn how to and this is a we thing. This isn't even just athletes. This is applies to everybody. You learn about money when you grow up. You are exposed to it in ways that other people are not. All of us have a story with, oh, I remember XYZ about money. And mine is, I remember my mom writing checks at the grocery store. And I just assumed, now mind you, this was 35 years ago, it was a long time ago. I had just assumed that checkbook was a magical money calculator and I could just write a check and the money was there, because I was experiencing what she was doing without understanding the repercussions of it. And then we get emotionally tied to money quickly based on our environment and what we're learning. And only after we've developed and learned about money in possibly not great ways do we get education. So then we have to unwind all of the bad stuff and we have to relearn it. And that's where money is 99% mindset, because you have to reframe all of the things that you've learned in your younger life, which are your formative years, to be able to control your emotions around money to build something better. And this is where I don't care if you're an athlete making $1 million or you are 18 and you just entered the trades and you're making $14 an hour as an intern for your journey lineman and you're in your internship program. Great. You still have to have the fundamentals. You still have to reframe all the bad lessons that you've learned, because if you carry those forward, they are going to destroy your financial picture. So in my book, and Train Your Money, when I'm talking about habit building and I'm talking about understanding where your money mindset is and using tools like cash flow managers or money maps, or even just knowing what your credit score is, while it sounds boring, it is the catalyst to wealth. And it helps drive habits. If you know what you're doing and you can start to change one habit a month or one habit a week, that's very hard to do. But one habit a month, you can build better habits. If you're getting better reps, the better the rep, the more muscle you build with money, the more muscle you have, the easier it is to conquer the next uphill battle. And that is why I say train your money. Money is not a one-time hit. It's not a one-time thing. You have to focus on it at least once a week for 15 minutes, just like you would train anything in the gym. Give it that respect in that time, because you need that in order to move to the next level. And that is where I think people are afraid of money, or they're like, oh, it's just going to be there. So there's no awareness to it. And our mindset takes us to a place that doesn't actually give us success. And that is why I say train your money like a pro athlete trains for success, because it's a regiment. It happens every day. You know what you have to do, and you know what success looks like. We just don't treat money that way. We treat money as a fear and we push it aside, or it's always just going to be there, I'm not going to worry about it, and you keep it pushing. Um, that's where we get lost. That's where the secret sauce comes into play of, do you actually know how to train your money?
You said that, most of us are not the athlete making potentially millions of dollars. And yet I'm curious about what are some of the commonalities, whether it's strengths or weaknesses around money or common mistakes or anything what do you see that is common regardless of someone's level of income?
I think there's three main things. The first one is credit. Surprisingly enough, whether you're an athlete, you're not an athlete, you come from a family with money, you come from a family without money, credit is stigmatized for whatever reason. There has been this wall of fear built up around credit and how it works for probably the last 20 years. Don't get into credit card debt. Don't use credit cards. Don't do this. Don't do that. And across every person I talk to between the ages of 18 and 40, I hear the same thing. I'm afraid of credit. I am afraid of credit. And that's mind blowing to me because credit is actually one of the best financial tools in your tool belt if you know how to use it. So I would say that's the first thing that is a commonality between any group I talk to is credit scary. I'm scared of it. I don't need it. I would disagree with you. You will need credit in every aspect of your life. And again, this is something we don't learn in school. So we're combating a stigma, and we're also trying to teach a true fundamental tool that will be useful for life. So credit's one. The second thing that I think is very common is people rely on bad information. And I don't mean to bash the influencer culture because I think there's a lot to say about having information at your fingertips. I think it's a beautiful thing. There are a lot of pseudo financial coaches out there who have zero certifications who just go online and talk about money. And the amount of bad information that I hear, I could probably make a killing on TikTok by debunking all of the bad financial information that's out there. I don't have the time or space for that. But what that means to me as a coach who is hearing the bad information as I'm walking into buildings, whether it's a corporate workshop event or it is an NFL facility or I'm walking into the baseball room at LSU, I am always hearing, oh, I heard this on TikTok. Is it real? I've only seen one or two posts where they showed me and I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually really valid. Yes. The rest of it, I'm like, absolutely not. You can't do that. I said, you're going to get audited and you're going to have to pay taxes on it on the back end. So why do things that are going to hurt you financially or could potentially pose a threat to your financial life? Don't do it. So influencer culture has made information more available, readily available. That doesn't mean the information is actually real or true or factual. So that's the second common misconception across everybody, that the internet is truth. It's just not. And then the third commonality, and this goes a little bit deeper into psychology, is that I see one of two types with everybody that I talk to, two types of people, and these are very broad, generalized categories. I see the fearful, avoidant money person. We're not talking relationship attachments. I'm talking about fearful avoidance with money, which is a very real categorization. I know that, again, influencer culture, fearful avoidant stuff pops up all the time. I'm talking about a completely different psychological side of money where someone is so afraid to lose the resources that they've accumulated but at the same time, they avoid dealing with money. So they're fearful and avoidant simultaneously. That's, one big broad category. And then the other category I see, and this is again a generalization, so it loops a bunch of people in, is the it'll come, it'll be fine, I'll figure it out next month. And that is the kind of carefree, money's always going to be there, abundance thought process. And I see those two no matter how much people make. I have people that are fearful and avoidant that make millions, and I have people that they are hanging on by a thread, and it'll be fine, I'll just deal with it next month. And I think that stems from environment, emotions, and education. It all comes back to the 3 E's of money that I discuss constantly in all my keynotes and workshops. And it is so common in every person that I meet that I can almost tell you money personality-wise which category they'll fall into within 2 questions. And I believe that drives a lot of the lack of education Because when you're an avoidant, you don't want to deal with it at all. You don't want to hear it. It's scary. I don't want to look at my bank account. So we avoid the education that's going to help us. And if you talk about the carefree abundance lifestyle mindset, and some people with abundance are restrictive, they do well. But when you're just carefree and you don't care, you're not going to go look for ways to improve because you don't care. And I would say that the majority of Americans fall into one of those two. Anytime I meet with someone and even my family, I'm like, oh, I know where you're at this week. And it's not something that is a tried and true every single moment. There are days where someone who's super fearful of money might just have a wild hair and they go off and they do something crazy with money. And then they come back and they have regret for the next 8 months. We see that too. Or we have someone who is carefree and they get a credit card bill for 5 grand and the oh shit moment happens. Oh my God, what am I going to do now? And they fall into fearful or they fall into avoidant. I'm just not going to look at it. So we see this commonality in everyone we talk to. And it's not segregated or looped by what you play in college or how you grew up. It is a full melding of every experience you've ever had that causes people to think this way about money. So when we are talking about, hey, we've got people in all of these different places and that they're making so much money or they're not, I really think it comes down to way too many people telling bad money advice. I think credit has become such a stigma that people can't use it to actually build wealth, which is hindering. And then we have this money mindset that's always playing on a loop in the back of our head. And depending on how we've grown up with money, it changes how we move with it. And those are our big commonalities across all boards.
When you talk about credit, are there, it seems to me that sort of the typical situations that you would see, or perhaps mindsets, are things like someone is fearful or avoidant of credit because they think that it's going to be too easy to get into debt, or that they have heard stories or maybe even experienced in their childhood that, the collections has come calling or something like that. And and so they're just staying away from credit because there's, fear of I might get in debt if I can shorten it to that. And then maybe on the flip side, or just as an alternative to that, I'm thinking is somebody who feels like, well, I'm going to get paid. And so I can afford to put the charge on my credit card, or I can afford the home loan or whatever it is. And they're willing to use credit, but not willing to think critically or willing to forecast, is that future obligation realistic?
You're right on both fronts. And again, it comes back to that emotions, environment, education. When you're fearful with credit and fearful of collections and debt because you've seen it in your past, or it's happened to you, or it happened to your parent or your brother or your sister or grandpa, insert person here, you are going to be hesitant and cautious, rightly so. The problem with that mentality when it comes to something like credit is infused in everything we do on a daily basis. Getting a cell phone bill, getting an apartment, setting up your utilities. There are companies that will not hire you if you don't have a good credit score. It allows you to leverage and buy things when you need to. It's very much a tool if used responsibly. So that fear that hinders people from learning the proper way to use it and harnessing that tool, those people are missing out. Now, counter to that, because you had also mentioned the flip side, which is that abundance. I'm getting paid. I got it. It's fine. Just put it on the credit card. That is a very dangerous mindset. That leads to the collections, the racking up massive interest charges on a credit card that you don't need to be paying to a bank. It teaches really bad spending habits, and you're spending before you have that money readily available, which is a massive problem. And so we're looking at both sides of a very wide spectrum. And what I tell anybody in both of those situations is very simple. Credit is a tool. If used properly, and there is an actual easy, right way to use credit, you can not only leverage it to improve your financial life, but anytime you do have to borrow money, buy a car, buy a house, you want to buy a business, you need to finance something. Let's be very real. I think it's what 45% of Americans finance their engagement rings, right? We're talking about an engagement ring to get married and you're financing it on a private loan at 25%. Woo! No, sir. Let's roll it back because you're paying so much money to finance that without understanding if you would have used credit properly, built a proper score, maybe had access to a cheaper line of credit, you're not paying the bank as much money. Now, counter to that, people that just go, oh, I'll throw it on my credit card and I have a 33% interest rate and it's no big deal. Well, if you're running a $5,000 a month balance and you're not paying it off, you're paying that creditor $3,000 to $4,000 a year just in interest. So you're actually borrowing more than $5,000. You're doubling it. And that, again, lessons. You don't know what you don't know. And so both of those mindsets can hinder, but they would send you in different directions. One of them is going to limit your ability to borrow money at a cheap rate or potentially leverage something in your life at a cheap rate. And the other one is going to drive you into a really bad spot. And as credit is my favorite topic. And all my NFL players know that. I'm like, okay, guys, we're going to talk about credit. And they're like, oh, God, not this again. Because I love it as a tool of leverage and a way for people to improve their financial life without actually ever paying a cent of interest to the banks. And it's possible. It's doable. I have a whole course on it because it's so easy. Now, when I say it's easy, you're laughing at me, Eric, and I know it's not easy because here's where people get stuck, right? It's not the blueprint. It's not, hey, spend less than 30% on your credit card. Make sure you have a rewards card that's giving you points or cash back based on your preference, right? All the good fun stuff. No, it's not that. It's when people can't control their spending, when their lifestyle inflates more than what they can afford. That's where credit's dangerous, no matter what part of the spectrum you fall on. And if we're not aware of how we spend, credit can be a death trap for us. But if we can master cash flow and we can master how our lifestyle should look, credit is a beautiful complementary tool that will allow you to do more as time goes on. And that's the piece I think people miss because no one openly talks about it because it's taboo. No one wants, oh, I have a great credit score. Oh, I don't want to talk about it. Right? We don't talk about it enough and we don't talk about it in an educational way. So it becomes a problem quickly.
You at one point said credit score, and I think that also underlies a fair amount of what you're saying there. And you talk about credit score in your book. So I want to come back to that. But before that, when you were talking about influencer culture and I believe it was avoidant and abundant mindsets, I'm going to ask you to predict the future. And you don't have to. You can avoid this question if you wish to, but I'll tell you my opinion on not just sort of money topics that we're dealing with here, but my position on culture change generally. Maybe I'm just a cynic, Coach Hill, but I think that it's becoming easier and easier over time to fall into confirmation bias because maybe I do see the TikTok and I don't know enough to know whether or not something's a good or bad idea. And I have legitimate curiosity about, oh, could that work? Or it could be food, it could be finances, it could be anything. And so my curiosity is real. But then when I act upon this information or when I go to someone like you and I say, is this something really that I can do with my money? And so I either act upon it and I get negative results, or I ask you and I get a negative response, perhaps, if I can put it in brief. I think it's easier to fall into avoidance of that data and, avoid empiricism. It's easier to fall into confirmation bias that, well, everyone is saying this because in part, not only do we have filter bubbles and, we can talk about all that stuff, but also it really is just so much easier to to move away from a potential hard lesson and to move on to something that feels good, not because I'm a bad person or sorry, not I, that someone who does this is lazy or a bad person or doesn't want to be better. I think most of us as human beings do want to improve and feel productive and succeed in a number of ways, whether it's as a parent or as a master gardener or whatever. But if you, as a master gardener, have to accept that you made a mistake and that is what is causing your weeds this year to be so much worse, or you could just till everything up and you could replant, or you can just, I'll just avoid the garden this year. Then I think that's kind of the equivalent of just flipping to the next TikTok, Instagram reel, streaming show. And that's where I think confirmation bias comes in. So, okay, coming back around to predicting the future. You don't have to if you don't want to. But to me, I feel like until such time as we have some major culture or society change, that this is a bit like what I was responding to or how I was responding to the NIL question and getting more good or bad reps in. That it seems like if you are one of those people that has the right support and or you are willing to look at those weeds growing and realize I did that, then you are likely to continue progressing and maybe progress and get better, improve even faster while everyone else is actually moving in the opposite direction. I feel like that's just getting worse over time in a lot of areas.
I'm going to agree with a lot of that. But I'll add one more layer to it. We're talking about confirmation bias. We're talking about influencer culture. We're talking about how that impacts finances. I'm going to add one more piece to this. And this kind of goes with good and bad, negative responses versus positive responses and confirmation bias simultaneously. When we get on our social media platforms, and let's be very clear, everyone in America lives on that at least an hour a week, if not more. And an hour might be very gracious. It's probably a lot more than that. We are reinforcing through the algorithm. It is reinforcing the things that we interact and like. And that provides backing to confirmation bias, right? It is saying, oh, I like this. Feed me more of that. Give me more of what I like or what makes me feel good. I don't want to hear what makes me angry or frustrated or XYZ. Insert bad emotion here. Because social media is driven to keep you engaged and going, they feed confirmation bias through instant gratification. And that means that you're getting fed a line that maybe isn't actually good for you and may actually result in bad decisions because of how the algorithms work. And I'm not putting any blame on any one social platform. They're designed to engage you. So if you're interacting with content, of course, they're going to show you more content like that. That is what they are designed to do. So when we're talking about finance, you said, well, when those athletes come to you and they say, is this real? And I kind of meet it with a negative, ooh, we're not going to do that. A good financial coach will always provide a positive spin. And what I mean by that, and this is what I do with everyone I work with, if someone comes to me and says, should I do a LERP? Should I do a life insurance policy that is overfunded? I only made $30,000 this year. And I said, oh, where did you see that? And they show me the post. And I say, okay, that is specific to X, Y, and Z person who has all of these boxes checked. However, I see what you're trying to do here. I want you to go research. I'm just going to say ETFs and index funds, totally different insurance projects or products, investment and insurance products. But the idea is you don't discourage the education, you discourage the outcome. And you show that there's other education that will have a positive outcome. Because if you use that tool, here's what could go wrong. But if you go and research these things and start learning about them, they're actually where you are right now. These are going to be really good for you to learn. Now, my job isn't to say, go invest in this or go do this. It's to say, here's 8 different ways you can go. Pick the road you like and then go down it. And that's where I think the world has, because of confirmation bias and instant gratification, we don't pause long enough to find a secondary resolution, which then causes people to just say, I'm not going to weed the garden. I'm going to till that thing up. I'm going to destroy it and I'll worry about it next year. We're not willing to look at the thing and say, I'm going to pick the weeds. I'm going to put a different fertilizer on this. I'm going to make sure the nitrates in my soil are balanced, and we're not going to have this happen again. It's harder to do that than it is to blow something up and start over. And we're not trying to blow the house up and start over. That is not the goal. And that's as a financial coach, I never want someone to have to hit reset. I want them to be able to say, I'm here now. What do I do to grow? Not, I'm here now. and I made this horrible decision and I have to start over. I'd rather catch it before that happens. So, with where society is going, I agree. Without some sort of shift, we are going to continue to see confirmation bias reaffirmed through the platforms that we're using on a daily basis. And now with AI, you do get confirmation bias if you're chatting with GPT or Claude or Perplexity or Google Gemini, because you're asking it a question. And unless you tell it to play devil's advocate and combat you and give you options, is going to give you what you want to hear, because that's what it's designed to do. And that is going to drive, I think, less critical thinking skills, because you're relying on something to just confirm what you already know and not give you some critical feedback. But it's also going to stop us from taking the next step of learning or reflecting on the issue and then saying, how do I change this?
You say in your book, it's something like you had this goal to have a credit score of 800 or a quote unquote perfect credit score, something
Yep.
along those lines. And then I think you do a good job of examining the realities of what really is a credit score, and what's the highest realistic credit score that someone can have, and how much is that really worth, and how to go about improving your credit score, and a number of things. And as I said, I think that credit score underlies some of the discussion about credit and debt. And so I was curious, would you remind me about what credit score is, and then also how you think about credit score in relation to taking on credit, using credit to build someone's wealth or to make investments, and what I guess the average person should know or think about their credit score.
Absolutely. Credit is actually very simple. It's simply your reputation with money when using a credit source, a credit card, an auto loan, or a mortgage. And all a credit score represents is your ability to repay the money that you borrow. So when you're getting your score and it says 500, 600, 700, or 800, depending on where you fall on that spectrum, all it's telling a potential lender is how likely you are to repay that loan that you borrow and how fast you're going to repay it. AKA, will it be on time? Will it be late? Will it never be repaid? So it is your reputation with banks on how you borrow money and if you pay it back. That's all credit is. I like to explain it this way to my athletes, and I do this a little bit in Train Your Money as well in my book. Your credit report, there's 3 reporting agencies: Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. Those 3 credit reporting agencies give you a credit report, and they're all slightly different. And the reason we have 3 is if one has an error and the other 2 don't, we as consumers have some protection to get that fixed. So it's important that we have 3. They will all give you a slightly different score. That's normal and healthy. Don't panic. But those reports tell a lender your entire credit history. It goes all the way back to the first time you opened a credit card. And it tells that lender how consistent you've been in using credit. Do you use it every month? Do you only use it once a year? How do you use it? And then do you pay things back on time? It's like your stat sheet. So I use Michael Jordan as my example because I love me some MJ. I grew up watching him. I mean, I watched his championships. Okay, that's how old I am. And I watched him play. And one of the beautiful things about MJ, and I'll go to bat for this all day because I think he's the GOAT and he's greater than LeBron. We can argue about it, Eric. We can argue. His stat sheet was flawless. And when I say his stat sheet was flawless, I don't mean he was a perfect player. I mean the level of consistency in play that he had over the 7 years that they went to championship finals, or even look at earlier in his career and later in his career, he was so consistent. You could look at him and know, even if he has a bad game, he's still going to be elite. Your credit report is your stat sheet. It's going to tell a lender, how long have you been doing this? Because if you've only been doing it for a year, it's going to be a little iffy. They're going to be like, the lender's going to go, are they really going to pay it back? But if you've got 7 championship belts or 7 championship rings under your belt, they're going to look at you and say, oh yeah, they're going to pay their money back. They're not a risk to us. We can lend them money cheaper. We know we're going to get paid back. There's no risk there. Keep it pushing. And so your stat sheet tells a lender everything about how you move with money. And credit really only consists of 3 things. Do you pay your bills on time? 35% of your credit score. Do you use credit properly? And there's 2 pieces to that. That's 30% of your credit score. And then the last piece is going to be time, how many credit accounts you have, and how often you open those credit accounts. And that's a much smaller piece of the pie. But they're still important. And that length of credit history is 15% of your score. So that stat sheet needs time to build. So your job is to continue to build it and get in those good reps. And the way you do it is number 2, using credit correctly. Take your credit card, look at the limit, never use more than 30%, ever. So if you have a $1,000 limit, you should not use more than $300. If you want to be elite and you want a faster build, never use more than 10% of your limit. So $100 a month, put your Netflix subscription on it and keep it moving. You don't have to use the max, but you should at least be doing something. And the second part of using credit correctly is consistency. Like MJ, you got to show up every month and do it every month. You can't pause and stop using credit. You can't shred your credit cards and close them. The moment you close them, you lose your credit history. So you have to be really strategic. And that is, get a credit card, use it consistently every month, put one subscription on it so you can learn how it works, pay it off. And within a year, you're going to watch your credit score completely change in a very, very good way. But it requires consistency. You can't let lifestyle creep come into your world, and you have to manage your cash flow. If you know you can't do that, credit is not for you right now because it will put you in a bad position. But that is what credit is, and just in a nutshell, a very fast version of how it works. In my book, I show you how I went from 0 credit to an 800 credit score in 3 years, from 18 to 22, and I never paid a dime in interest to a bank, not once. So just, it goes to show you can build credit and you never have to pay anything to do so.
When you say, somewhere around 10 to 30% as the threshold of my credit card or whatever else that I'm
Yeah.
using, this is just the way that my mind works, Coach Hill. But I'm thinking, okay, well, what do I need to do to get a bigger credit limit? And then that way I'm going to use less. And I'm guessing it's more complex than that.
So you can't get a huge credit limit unless you've got some credit history. You need that stat sheet to look pretty fat. It's got to look nice. Credit limits are built over time. I actually talk about this as well in Train Your Money. I talk about how I started at a $500 credit limit. That's all the bank would give me. My income did not support more than that, and I was a college student. And as I showed positive credit usage, they kept upping my line. And I didn't ever ask for it. I didn't apply for it. It naturally came about because I was doing things the right way. Now, when I left college, my income went from peanuts to a little higher. Nothing, great. I worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car making $30,000 a year. Let's just be really clear. I was not making a solid living. It was 2009. It was coming out of the height of the recession. It was not a good time to be even looking for a job. But because I went from nothing to 30,000, they upped my credit limit again because now I have the ability to sustain a higher limit. So limits don't just come so your credit usage can be XYZ. They come based on how you use credit, how long you've had it established, and your income. Then you can start getting higher credit utilization limits. That's why I tell people, pause, literally take it a step at a time. You don't have to spend all your money on credit right away. Ideally, we would like you to pay your bills on credit at some point, so you're racking up the travel points and the cash back. You get nothing for paying with a debit card. You get nothing for paying with a check. You get nothing for paying with Zelle. If you pay with a credit card and it has reward points, you are getting something on the back end, whether it's a free vacation, cash back in your bank account every month. There is absolutely benefits to that if done properly. If you can't control yourself, credit's not the tool you should be using on a daily.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about people who maybe have, I don't know if addiction is the right word, or maybe self-control
Yes.
issues, which you kind of talked about a little bit. But in your work, have you encountered enough people that as soon as they get that credit card or whatever it is, they just can't control their spending? It's part of their psychology. It's the way that they're built, sort of thing. Have you encountered enough that as someone listening to you, I need to think, well, it's really hard for a large portion of people, or is it such a small percentage that really 99% of us can do it? We just have to commit to that kind of self-control or that plan.
I'd say about 1 in 20. have zero self-control. 1 in 20 people just can't do it. It is not for them. Or the big limit is not for them, but it doesn't mean they can't build credit. So if you're that person listening and you think, man, if I had $1,000 credit limit, I'd be in trouble. How you do this, how you build credit, is you get a secured credit card, which is you putting $100 to a bank or giving $100 to a bank, and they give you a credit card for $100. It's called a secured credit card. You can go look this up. There's a couple really good ones out there. The two that come to mind are Capital One and Wells Fargo. I know they both have great secured credit card programs. Basically, that means you put up $100, they give you $100. You control the limit. You control the limit. And because it's only $100, if you spend $100, you can usually manage that. If you really blow the bank, you're not going over $100 on this bad boy. But you're not using it for the purposes of spending. You're using it for the purposes of building credit. So your JOB in this case, your job in this case, is to find one thing that costs you $10 a month or $15 a month, put it on auto pay, and pay that one bill, and just let your credit build. Because you take out the need to control at that point. You've set up boundaries where it's going to pay this bill. It's only this limit. I'm controlling everything. Secured credit cards will never increase your limit unless you put more money down. And at that point, we would say go get a traditional credit card with a small limit to see how you handle that. But if you really have that impulse, no control, you need limits and you need boundaries. I call it bumper plates, like in bowling when I was a kid and they threw the bumper plates up and it's like, here's your lane, stay in it. That's how I view a secured credit card, because no one knows it's secured, by the way. No one's going to know your card is secured or not. Not a single person. If you were to pull it out at a restaurant, no one would know the difference. That is between you and your bank only. But it allows you to set boundaries, whereas a traditional credit card, the bank is setting those limits and boundaries for you. So when we talk about, Eric, these people that, and I used to be one. I used to be one of those people that just didn't care and spent whatever I had and it was fine. And that was before I went through a very traumatic financial experience, which I talk about in my book. That changed how I thought about money. But up until that point, I would have needed boundaries. I would have needed someone to say, you can't spend more than this, period. Here, we put the limits on there. You can't go over them. So I'm not even able to push those because they're set in stone. And that's where I would say for somebody who's really not good at controlling that instant gratification bug that bites us, that's going to be the card for you guys, because it still builds credit. It's still giving you a history. It's fantastic. It does exactly what a traditional credit card does. Limits your ability to spend.
I'll share one thing about myself. And I thought about this reading your book and as you're talking, and thankfully my wife and I we acknowledged this in these various decisions that we've made, but we have no debts. And, the house that we live in, for example, we paid that off. But we knew that our mortgage rate was much lower than we would have made on average in the market. And, we could have put that money to use in other places as well. But just to make it very simplistic, you put your money into an S&P 500 mutual fund or ETF or whatever it is. And so we knew that 10, 20, 50 years from now, we would have ended up more than likely with a lot more money if we had used those funds for something else. But it was important to us psychologically, to just not have any debts. And
Yeah.
you could call that a dumb financial decision, but, and no one ever has, at least not to my face when we've talked about it. But, for us, we felt like we just really don't want to carry any debt. We're not afraid of it. We have credit cards. We use our credit cards. We pay them off. But it was really like, if we just, if at some point in my life I was to lose my job, get run over by a car, we have whatever, some massive need for money, it would lower our stress level to know that, 5-10 years ago, we used all of this money to pay off a low interest rate mortgage. So we
Yeah.
don't have that money now. But that's one bill we don't have to deal with anymore. And so as I was reading the book and as you're talking, I'm thinking about, I am really thankful that we thought about what we were giving up when we made that decision, but also what we were gaining.
Well, opportunity cost. You guys sat down as a team and said, here's our concerns, here's what's weighing on our hearts, here's what we want our lifestyle to look like. What's the path? And I think this is where people, I love that you brought this up because you're going to have half of the people say, oh, that was a dumb decision because your interest rate was low. I'm going to counter them and say, it probably was one of the best decisions, not only for your financial health, but also your marital health for two reasons. One, your financial health being you guys knew what your goal was, what your lifestyle was. You were projecting what could potentially happen in the future and how to protect each other, but also your marital health. You made a financial choice together that was a unified choice. And I think people forget that money is not, it doesn't always have to be the math. Like I said, mindset, right? It doesn't always have to be the math. It doesn't always have to be, oh, I could have made 100,000 extra dollars in retirement. But how's your quality of life up to retirement? Because we got a 65-year period leading up to that. So walk me through that. A financial advisor will always fight me on this because I'm looking at as a coach, and it's fine because my brother's a financial advisor and we talk about this stuff all the time. And he'll say things like, that's an emotional decision. Here's a strategic decision. And we talk through it. It doesn't mean you have to go with one or the other. It just means you need to know what your comfort level is. And money is more emotional than it is anything else. You have a relationship with money, truly a relationship with it. You and your wife have discussed yours. But anyone listening, you have a relationship with money. And that relationship can be healthy, it can be toxic, it can be somewhere in between. And depending on how you're choosing to use it, it may look really weird to someone on the outside. That doesn't matter because the two of you made a decision together, or this could be a solo choice. In my case, all of my financial decisions go through my dad and my brother because after my mom passed, as a team, we kind of united our finances. And anytime we make a big strategic financial decision, everybody's in on the conversation. Everyone gives their 2 cents, similar to you and your wife, because it matters how the people that are closest to you are going to be impacted. And it also matters what their quality of life is. And a lot of financial decisions are made at spur of the moment. They're not thought out, which is okay. We're trying to get away from that. It does happen. But if you're looking at making good financial choices, making big purchases, spending big chunks of money, there has to be some thought. And the fact that you guys sat down and said, this is good for us, this is how we want our lifestyle to go. Okay, so we miss out on some gains. I'm comfortable for the next 30 years. I mean, that's more that while it might be an opportunity cost in the market, it's not an opportunity cost on your lifestyle. And I think people forget that that is part of the conversation. I talk about it in chapter 8 of my book, how to have conversations with people about money. They're in your circle to identify if they should even be in your circle, one. But then it's not easy to sit down and for you and your wife, Eric, hey, we got to talk about this. Like, that's a hard thing to just even ask your partner. Can we talk about money? Maybe it's stressful for her. It's not for you, or it's stressful for you. And she's like, oh, sure, whatever. Meeting that person where they are and then making a strategic decision. Hardest thing you can do in money, but it's also the most beneficial.
You're reminding me of, I interviewed a woman, Annalie Kruger, on the podcast. She wrote a book called The Invisible Patient, if I recall correctly. She does aging planning. And one of the things that she talks about in her book is the very common situation of, dad always managed the finances or something like that. And mom doesn't know where anything is. And dad has gone senile or had a heart attack or whatever, very common things that happen. And now maybe we need to get dad into some sort of care. And we know they have the money. We don't know where it is. Or now dad is gone and mom doesn't know, is she going to be able to take care of herself or whatever it is. And you're reminding me of one of the things that she said is I spend 80% or something of my week in these family mediation meetings because people didn't prepare. They didn't want to talk about it. Dad didn't want to open up or whatever it is. I'm generalizing, of course. And or if they talked about it, no one could agree. They had different values or priorities. And
Yes.
it's interesting how it really is true in a lot of different ways when you say a relationship with money and that mindset is important. It's really interesting to me how it can show up in so many different areas because you might think of that as a healthcare thing or an aging thing,
Yep.
but the money becomes very important, and talking to people about it, or it becomes very important 10 years, 20 years before you get to that point.
It's probably the most important conversation I've ever had in my life. When my mom got sick the first time, I was 19, and I talk about this in my book, and it's still she passed away 13 going on 14 years ago, and it's still very hard for me to talk about. I'm sorry, 12 years going on 13. Apologies. I have my dates all wrong. It feels like it was yesterday, but it's been quite a long time. Um, when my mom got sick, I was 19, and we were by no means a wealthy family. We were middle class America. We had what we needed. My college fund was there, but we didn't have everything, right? And my dad was a very good saver. My dad was very much a resource gatherer. He wanted to make sure the family was healthy and happy. And I knew nothing about my family's financial situation when I was 19. So we're talking about talk to your parents, have open dialogue. My dad sat down and taught me financial principles and made sure I understood how credit worked and how banking worked. And he was in a banking background. So I was one of the blessed ones that got a lot of that education just through osmosis and asking questions and him telling me to do certain things. But when my mom got sick, it changed the conversation to something I wasn't quite prepared for at 19, but I'm glad I went through it. My dad sat my brother and I down. He was, mind you, only 17 at the time. And he said, here's everything. Here's our life insurance policies. Here's our bank accounts. Here's our retirement accounts. Here's everything. To this day, my dad swears we never had that conversation. And my brother and I are both like, yes, we did. We vividly remember this conversation because we didn't know how much money my dad made. We had no idea how much money my mom made. That was not an open dialogue in our household. We talked about everything else with money, but I didn't know their personal financial picture. And let me tell you, going through 7 years of an autoimmune battle with my mom. There were good months. There were really bad months. There was medical bills that just showed up. It felt like every day I opened the mailbox and I'm like, what are we going to get hit with today on a medical bill, right? And my dad was forced to restart at 54 years old after my mom died. 55, I'm sorry. 55 years old. She was 54 when she passed. And to watch someone who built an entire life with this person and then lose it all, to then have to restart at 55 is the most gut-wrenching, horrible, guilt-ridden feeling I've ever had to watch my dad go through that. And my brother and I promised each other no matter what we did, we were going to make sure my dad retired. But we also knew at that point where he was starting from at 55 because we had this open dialogue and we had hard conversations and we had real conversations. What do we have to get rid of? What do we have to sell? Are we going to be able to keep the house? Like those were very real things for us. And when my mom passed, the medical bills didn't stop right away, right? They never do. They kept coming for about 6 months. So we were digging ourselves out of that hole and trying to rebuild. And had my dad not been open with us about what was really happening, my brother and I wouldn't have been able to chip in, but it also would have made end of life conversations much harder. And all of us pretend like we're never going to die because we don't want to think about it. But the reality is every single person, there's 100% chance you're not going to be here at some point. And the conversations leading up to that, asking that person's wishes, understanding where their financials are, we didn't know where any of it was for my mom. We knew where all my dad and mom's joint stuff was, but my mom had her own business. She had her own business accounts, her own credit cards. Trying to uncover all of that without any information on top of having to bury our mother, worst thing on the planet. And I talk about this in my book, not because I want anyone to feel bad for me. This happens to people every day. If we know what's going to happen, let's set up an estate plan or a will, or at least just give someone in your family a list of all your bank accounts and how to get into them so that at some point when the time does come, you can help or they can receive help or you can get help from them, whatever the case may be. But it's so hard to talk about what are we doing if I die? What are we doing if you die? These are real hard conversations. And the reason I talk about it in Train Your Money is because it is actually one of the biggest causes of financial strife in family members with elderly parents. The infighting, the lack of knowledge, it could be a lot of different factors. Some people could be getting along great and just not know where anything is. So you can't pay for burial costs or you can't pay for cremation services. And another common misconception that I've heard in the United States is that the state pays for you to bury your family member. No, other countries do. In the United States, you're responsible for those fees. So if you don't have 10 to 20 grand set aside for that purpose, you are now going to be running into a financial deficit to take care of your family member that's passed. I don't think we spend a lot of time on this. It is a hard topic, but we don't talk about it. And I think it's a necessary one because it's all of us are going to experience a family member passing, and at some point we are going to go. We've got to talk about the financial implications.
You talk about in your book, and you just referenced that your dad or both of your parents talked to you and your brother about money growing up, at least, how to manage it or how to understand it or some things like that. And, you know, talking to your children, even when you're an adult, about, whatever age I am, this woman, Annalie Kruger, she talks about, she was, I forget the age, but I think it was maybe 40 or something like that when she was hit by a school bus. And, you don't plan that, I got all of my paperwork together yesterday because I knew I was going to get hit by a school bus today or have that heart attack or whatever. So you just, the time to plant that tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And as the idea or reference to kids reminds me of something that I had wanted to ask you, which is about children getting the experience with money. And so I have some notes here. So I made some notes on the law in my state. So my oldest child is 12. And in the state of Illinois, if you want to get a job before, I know for certain that it's before the age of 16, but I think it might be up to the age of 18. You have to get a job offer. You have to have a job offer in hand, and you have to get it approved by your school district. And then there are things like you can only work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. during this school year while school is in session. And then I think it's 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. I believe when school is out. You can never have more than a combined 8 hours or 8 hours of combined school and work in a 24-hour period. And there are other things. You can't work in a lot of places. Like, I'm not going to get this exactly correct, but essentially, if there is any alcohol served, you can't work there. And then you can't work in places where there's some form of danger. So, like, again, I'm not going to get this exactly correct, but it's something like you can't work for an auto mechanic, basically, because there are fumes around, there's some danger, physical danger, whatever else. Again, I don't have it perfect on those last few things, but when I became aware of some of this, it's not like I'm trying to send my 12-year-old daughter off to work in a machine shop or whatever, or to serve beer at a bar, but when I became aware of this, I thought that's good for some things, but at least as it relates to your book and some of the things you talk about, I was curious about your perspective on, you know, w- while net maybe it's positive, that it seems to me like not being able to or making it harder for a kid to have a summer job to be like me. I was a lifeguard when I was in high school, and I worked year round because I was a swimmer. So I was at the pool all the time, but I also worked maintenance at the pool. I was there until midnight on school nights. And then I was there again at 5 a.m. some mornings, not all, because I was lifeguarding for the people who'd come in and swim laps before work. Not everybody needs to have the childhood that I had. It's not like it was necessarily better or worse, but I was earning money and, with relatively low stakes, I always had my parents to go home to, so to speak, or to bail me out. I was still getting the opportunity to
Yes.
learn how to earn and how to manage money. And so I don't know, do you have a perspective on when's the right time for kids to get a job, learn to manage money, how we handle that in today's environment? Or anything around this topic?
Yes, but my perspective on this, because I don't work with a lot of kids, is coming from my own personal experience, which leads me to 3 avenues. So I did work in a restaurant starting at 14, and Oregon, where I grew up, did have specific, requirements. It was a family-run restaurant, so I was basically family member for close enough. It was, not my actual blood family, but I grew up with all these people. So the rule was I couldn't work past 9 p.m. and I could only work 5-hour shifts on weekdays, and I could work a 10-hour shift on the weekends if I chose to. So our labor laws were a lot less crazy. And then at 16, there are no rules. Like at 16, you can work whatever hours you want. So I probably worked there 30 hours a week at 16. I had my car, I did my things. I was given the option by my parents. Again, this is very, this is a lucky situation. I was not lucky, but I'm grateful for it. I was told you can play 3 sports and we will pay for your car and insurance and you will learn how to do that. So I would have had to sit down, write the check for the insurance payment, understand how the car was gifted. It was a very cheap car. We weren't getting nice things. It was a nice car. Don't get me wrong. My dad did a very good job for us, but it wasn't an expensive car by any means. So there was no note on it, but he was showing us how that worked. So I could do that and I could get my stuff paid for and learn on that front, or I could go get a job. And I didn't want to play sports and I really just wanted a car. And I grew up in Fast and Furious moment. Like it came out my freshman year of high school. And that was a very big thing for us. I know that sounds so corny now, but like in 2021, 2001, that was a big deal.
I live my life a quarter mile at a time. Nothing else matters.
And we all wanted the Fast and the Furious car. So I didn't want to play sports. I wanted a car. Now that had always been my nature. So the rule was I had to maintain a certain GPA and I had to pay all my car insurance, all my gas, and then I had to save 50% of whatever I earned. And then my parents said the rest of it you can do what you want with. And the first month of getting a paycheck, I blew through everything and didn't save 50%. So my parents took the next month of paychecks and put it all in my savings account. I learned very, very much the hard way how this stuff worked. So it gave me this insight. But my brother went the sports route. He was a tri-sport athlete. And so he didn't learn money the same way I did. He learned money basically through osmosis and in the household. And I will say with him, that was one of the things he said going into college was, I wish I would have learned more how this worked, whether I was actually working or it was a class of some kind. But he also took finance classes and accounting classes while we were in high school because he went on to have multiple college credits before he ever went to college. So he actually understood it. He's like, but I never had it in practice. And I wish we would have had it in practice. I do think there is absolute validity in your formative high school years to working some sort of job, whether it's a 5-hour-a-week summer job, something you work part-time while you're in school, because it teaches you how the system works in real time. It's not theoretical. It's practical, hands-on. This is happening to you. This is how this works. And a lot of us do not learn theoretically. We have to learn in practice. So for Illinois, I understand maybe why they have those policies. And I don't think people should be maybe working at 12, 14. Great. 14 to 18, you are in high school. You are at a point where you're in your teens. You've got a little bit of common sense. You can kind of make the jobs like I was a hostess. I worked in a restaurant and bar, but I wasn't allowed in the bar side. Cool. Great. I worked on the restaurant side and I was a hostess. I learned so much about the logistics of a restaurant working in it for 4 years. It's not just the paycheck. It's the work ethic, the discipline, how the business is run. There's so much you just innately absorb at that age that you maybe don't realize you're absorbing in real time. I think there's some value to that. And I think when we take it off the table, we actually hinder financial growth for teens because they're not getting that exposure. Not every teen is going to get it. Athletes probably won't. They're going to learn discipline in different ways. But I do think it needs to be something that is at least on the table for 14 to 18-year-olds.
I agree with you. And it sounds to me like you're thinking of some of those other things that, you know, that there are benefits of, kids who maybe their parents aren't watching out for them paying attention to school or any number of things. It's not like I don't want to portray it like me thinking that it's all downside. And I don't think you're taking it like that, Coach Hill, but
Not at
just to
all.
state that I, but I, it sounds to me like you're also thinking of other things like, you know, learning how to work with other people. I was not a naturally responsible person, really. I just kind of followed whatever passion I had that day.
Yeah.
And it took me until I was about 30 probably to learn discipline and the value of hard work and all this. And I was lucky that I was reasonably intelligent and I found some things that I was gifted at. And some people are willing to pay for those things. But had I not had a job that I had to show up to at certain times, and it was not a difficult job, I didn't have emotional strain on me. I didn't really have physical strain. It wasn't really taxing mentally, but the fact that I had to communicate with people and show up and I had to be proactive if I wasn't going to be there or whatever, you learn things that are not just finance, that is how to be a good person in the world in many different ways. And so it really seems unfortunate to me. And I know that, you know, you're coaching around finances. And so that was part of my question, but I was really curious to get your perspective.
I genuinely agree with what you're saying because there are so many skills that you learn and grow with when you are in the workforce, no matter what job you're doing. And it doesn't have to be a stressful job to learn skill. And the accountability piece is, I think, what we're lacking within anything that we do now. So you were talking about I had to show up and I had to be proactive if I wasn't going to be there. We are so far removed from accountability now because we live and work on our phones. We don't do this enough. We don't do this interpersonal skill exchange. We're not in teams. We're not collaborating as much as we used to. And if we are, it's once you're out of college or once you're in the workforce at 18 and then you're thrust into something and you're like, I don't know how to do this. I don't have the interpersonal communication skills to do that job. I've never been told I have to show up on time. Yeah, I went to school, but I'd show up 30 minutes late and there was no punishment for it. Or I would bail out early and nobody said anything. You can't do that in the workforce. You lose your job. And that was something that even for me, this is my personality type. I hate being late. I want to be 10 minutes early to everything. But I worked with someone in the restaurant and I'll never forget, we grew up together. Like this guy and I, same age, we drove the same stinking car, the whole nine. Our parents went to high school together, very small community I grew up in. And it never failed. No matter how hard he tried, he could never get to work on time. He was always 20 minutes late. And we knew that. So the shift director actually moved his time up 30 minutes without actually telling. Like she said, okay, you need to be here at 4, but she scheduled him for 4:30. He would innately show up 10 minutes before 4:30 every single time. So they just worked around him because they knew that. Most companies are not going to be that nice. They're going to fire you after week 2. So I found it interesting that even the nuances at 14, 15, and 16 of watching how a company, in any company, it doesn't matter who you work for, how they move, how they operate, what they allow and what they don't allow, because some companies are very flexible, some are not. You can't learn that in school. And that's where that's why internships can be so powerful because you're thrust into something new and you're having to learn as you go. If we thrust people into money at 22 and say, figure it out as you go, we are failing them. And that's why I loved being able to work in high school because I was able to take a lot of the lessons and mistakes I made in very small dollar figures and translate that into something that didn't kill me in my 20s. I think by taking away that opportunity, whether people choose to use it or not, is actually hindering our workforce and our youth, anyone between 14 and 18. It's a good opportunity to have if they want it. And not everyone comes from a good financial household. Some kids have to work. So taking that off the table in situations where they need the money to feed themselves. And I have a lot of players like this, like they had jobs and they didn't know where their parents were for 5 weeks at a time. That's very real. By eliminating their ability to earn money at 16, you're actually hurting them more. So there are economic factors that also come into play that we could talk about from a higher level and different income classes that would also actually be hindered by this Illinois law.
Coach Hill, you and I are well aligned, but if I continue to ask you about this and bring things up. We'll be here for another hour. So,
It's been so much fun though, hasn't it?
yes, it has. And I really appreciate it. So, let me wrap up with these two questions, and you can handle them however you like, long or short, that does not matter. Where should I go if I want to learn more, connect? I have your book, but not everyone does. So, where should I go? And then the second question, if you were to have me think about one thing after this conversation, whether we talked about it or not, do you have a recommendation or words of wisdom that you would want to leave me with?
Love this. Okay. Well, we'll do the words of wisdom last. You can grab my book, Train Your Money, at trainyourmoney.com. That is our website. You can sign up for our newsletter. We do once a month newsletters with just value add personal finance tips, tricks, and all the fun stuff. And then the book itself is a reference book. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You can find a chapter you're interested in, dive into it. It's designed to be bite-sized. So enjoy. And again, engage with us on Financial Footwork on all social platforms. We love to hear from people, and we love when you ask us questions so we can share it with the community. So we're very much collaborative in that regard. In terms of one thing to walk away with, for anybody listening to this, tonight, take 5 minutes. I want you to write down your first memory with money. The first time you ever saw it being handled, the first time you remember it being spent, the first time maybe you remember asking a family member for their credit card to make a purchase on Amazon, whatever it was. I want you to write it down. Then I would like for you to take that memory, fast forward to where you are today, and ask yourself, with all of the things you know about yourself and how you learned about money from the beginning, how has that shaped where you are right now? And what's one thing you can do to shift your mindset into a more positive, helpful, useful way to start controlling your money? That may simply be slowing your spending. That could be tracking your expenses, actually physically writing them down when you come home. That could be checking your account balances more because you're afraid of opening your bank account app. Figure out where you feel the most anxiety around money or fear, and figure out how you can reframe it into something positive based on what you know about your environment. So that's what I'll leave you with. It will help you moving forward, and you'll think about it a lot more than just tonight.
That's interesting, and I appreciate that. Well, Coach Hill, thank you for being here. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed your book, as I said, and so I'm looking forward to everyone being able to listen to this. So thank you.
Thank you.